In the heart of a bustling city, where glass towers pierced the sky and streets thrummed with ambition, the divide between the world of the white-collar elite and the black-collar laborers could not have been starker. On the 52nd floor of the gleaming Avantech Tower, Alexander Crane, a sharp-suited corporate executive with a meticulously groomed appearance, leaned back in his leather chair and surveyed the floor below through tinted windows, eyes glinting with a mixture of power and contempt. The office was a temple of order, every desk spotless, every screen flickering with stock numbers and quarterly reports, but outside its walls, chaos reigned. Down in the industrial district, where the sun barely touched the asphalt and the air smelled of oil and smoke, a stream of black-collar workers, janitors, delivery personnel, and maintenance crews hustled through the labyrinthine alleyways, faces streaked with grime, shoulders heavy with the invisible burden of societal disdain. The contrast could not have been more pronounced. While Alexander and his peers discussed mergers and bonuses over crystal glasses of aged scotch, those below struggled to survive, their existence reduced to the margins of a world that openly despised them. Alexander's disdain was more than personal. It was systemic. Each directive he issued, each minor inconvenience he caused, was a deliberate assertion of superiority, a reminder to the laborers that their lives were expendable cogs in the great machine of his prosperity. The workers, sensing the hostility radiating from the upper floors, moved with a mixture of fear and resignation. They were seen as interchangeable, faceless, and unworthy of recognition, their individual struggles invisible to those whose power allowed them to dictate the rhythm of every workday. Yet, beneath the surface, a quiet resentment brewed, a storm gathering among the oppressed. Though Alexander's world was polished and secure, it existed atop a fragile foundation of exploited labor, and even as he reveled in the comfort and luxury he had clawed from the hands of others, the shadows of his employees' suffering crept closer, unnoticed but palpable, a silent warning that no fortress of privilege could ever be truly impregnable. One ordinary Thursday afternoon, as the hum of fluorescent lights mixed with the distant clatter of construction from below, an incident occurred that threatened to crack the veneer of control Alexander so carefully maintained. On the lower floors, where the cleaning crews moved with mechanical precision, the young son of the head custodian, Marcus, was cornered in a narrow service corridor by Eleanor, Alexander's wife, who had grown accustomed to the same sense of superiority that he exercised with cold precision. Eleanor's contempt was palpable, a force that seemed to radiate through the air as she berated and physically pushed the boy, laughing at his attempts to shield himself from her cruelty. The building's surveillance cameras captured every motion, but the upper management, absorbed in reports and meetings, remained oblivious. Marcus's cries echoed faintly through the hallways, a stark contrast to the muted sophistication of the boardroom above, where wealth insulated its occupants from reality. When Alexander unexpectedly returned home earlier than anticipated, he found the scene unfolding before his eyes. The polished elegance of his living room marred by the violent confrontation, his wife's aristocratic poise twisted into an expression of brute dominance. In that instant, Alexander faced a choice, one that would reveal the depths of his character and the dynamics of power that governed his world. With calculated calm, he intervened, not with the intent of punishing Eleanor for her actions but to reassert his own version of justice. He recognized in Marcus's fear the stark reminder of vulnerability that he had long ignored, the invisible human cost of the hierarchies he upheld daily. The moment became a crucible of moral tension, as Alexander weighed the implications of his intervention. Would he enforce the same ruthless standards he applied to his employees, or would he, for a fleeting moment, confront the inhumanity that unchecked privilege had allowed to fester? In that confrontation, the invisible line between power and oppression was drawn sharply, illustrating that cruelty, no matter how refined or socially sanctioned, carried consequences that could pierce the facade of wealth and influence. The aftermath of that day rippled far beyond the marble floors and chandeliers of the Crane residence, threading its way through the arteries of the city. From the mirrored glass towers where power resided, to the narrow backstreets where labor toiled unseen. The event had begun as a private storm, a moment of cruelty concealed within the polished veneer of luxury, but its echoes refused to be contained. Word spread quietly, first through whispers among the household staff, then through the corridors of the corporation Alexander oversaw, until it became a silent, persistent awareness that something sacred had been violated, and something irreversible had begun to shift. The unspoken rules that governed the relationship between wealth and servitude were now trembling under the weight of exposure. For Alexander, the reckoning began the moment he entered that opulent room and saw the fracture between his two worlds, privilege and humanity, laid bare. In the days that followed, he found no refuge in routine. Board meetings felt hollow, Polished speeches about corporate ethics rang false against the memory of Marcus's trembling figure and Eleanor's expression. Not of fear, but of entitlement. Each decision he made in his office, every signature scrawled across company papers, carried the silent question. What does power mean when it shields cruelty? Sleep became a fragile visitor. He wandered his vast penthouse at night, staring at the city lights below, a constellation of ambition and indifference, and felt, perhaps for the first time, the weight of his own complicity. Eleanor, once the embodiment of aristocratic poise, found her social circle quietly closing around her. Friends who had once admired her elegance now hesitated to speak her name. The press, though restrained by influence, began murmuring about a domestic scandal, hinting at fractures within the Crane dynasty. In the privacy of her chambers, she oscillated between indignation and remorse, not because of guilt, but because the world she had mastered with grace and control now looked upon her with quiet judgment. The golden cage she had built for herself began to feel suffocating, its opulence now mocking rather than protecting her. Marcus, meanwhile, carried invisible scars. His mother, the maid whose life had long been bound to silent servitude, feared retribution, yet for the first time, she saw a faint glimmer of something like justice. When Alexander called Marcus into his office weeks later, it was not to dismiss or reprimand him, but to apologize, awkwardly, sincerely, in a voice unused to humility. The words did not erase the memory, but they carved a space for dignity where none had existed before. For Marcus and the other black-collar workers, the change was not immediate, but it was real. New safety protocols were enacted, lines of communication opened, and the subtle arrogance that had defined upper management began to erode. The air within the company, once thick with hierarchy, felt, if only slightly, more breathable. In the city beyond, the incident became an allegory. Journalists and columnists referred to it obliquely, the Crane scandal, the incident at the penthouse, yet beneath the euphemisms lay a collective unease. It stirred conversations about the ethics of wealth, the illusion of civility, and the boundaries between employer and servant. Labor unions invoked it in quiet meetings. Young executives whispered about it in elevators. Even the most indifferent of elites found themselves glancing inward, however briefly. Something intangible had changed. Not the system itself but the moral temperature of the world it governed. Alexander's reflection deepened with each passing day. The man who once measured success by control and influence now began to see the fragility of both. He started initiatives within his corporation, scholarships for employees' children, revised treatment standards, anonymous reporting lines, not as acts of charity, but as penance. Yet even these gestures could not fully absolve him. He understood with growing clarity that redemption was not a public act but a private journey, one that demanded a continuous dismantling of the self he had built atop other silence. By the time winter set in, the Crane household had transformed from a monument of dominance into a silent reminder of consequence. The chandeliers still glittered, the halls still gleamed, but an undercurrent of humility flowed through the place. The servants walked with slightly straighter backs. The city, indifferent as always, continued its relentless hum, but beneath its rhythm lay a faint current of reckoning. It was not a revolution, not yet, but a seed, a whisper in the conscience of those who had long mistaken power for virtue. And so, the incident that began in violence ended in reflection. The divide between white-collar and black-collar remained, but it no longer felt impenetrable. The marble walls that once echoed only commands now bore the quiet resonance of acknowledgement. The story of that afternoon lived on, not as gossip, but as testimony. It became a mirror held up to a society that prided itself on civility while hiding cruelty beneath silk and glass. In that mirror, Alexander saw himself clearly for the first time, and in that vision, the foundations of privilege trembled, just enough for light to slip through. The city marched on relentless and radiant, but somewhere beneath its glittering skyline, a new awareness flickered, fragile yet undeniable, that even in a world built upon domination, the human spirit, once recognized, cannot be ignored forever.